This year, my husband frowned and scolded me. Didn't we agree that every year we go to our own families and spend Thanksgiving separately? Why are you changing your mind now? Our children standing nearby also chimed in, urging me to keep up with the times. These days, young people don't insist on going to the other person's family for Thanksgiving. Outwardly I gave in. But secretly I had already bought a train ticket to his family's home. When I arrived, everything became clear to me. No wonder he didn't want to take me home for Thanksgiving. He had brought his first love instead. At least I didn't come in vain. Now I understood why. Every time I mentioned wanting to spend Thanksgiving with him, our children always looked so uneasy and anxious. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the tickets to San Diego are sold out." "Ma'am? Ma'am?" the ticket agent tentatively asked, pulling me out of my daze. I snapped back to reality. "Oh, never mind, thank you by the way." Meanwhile, Alicia Swan, a well-known influencer in town, seen as a role model by younger people, updated her social media. In the video, a man was peeling tangerines for her, while a young pair in the yard were setting off fireworks. The scene was warm and harmonious, leaving viewers with a sense of peace. Caption: "Another Thanksgiving, may we have another 30 years together." Below, a stream of fan comments poured in. "You look so happy. I hope my mom gets this script in the next life. Look at Alicia's hands, she doesn't look like a 60-year-old at all. Please share your skincare secrets. Let's wish this couple a long-lasting love." Alicia replied, "Little sisters, you misunderstood. The man in the video is my old friend and his children. This is the 30th Thanksgiving we've spent together." In the comment section, many young people offered their heartfelt well wishes. I suddenly laughed, but tears fell like scattered beads. The man in the video was my husband of 30 years, and the children in the background were the ones I carried for 10 months and gave birth to. I almost wanted to call Duff immediately and demand why he had lied to me. My husband, Duff Goldman, had spent the last 30 Thanksgivings not visiting his long-lost relatives as he had claimed, but using it as an excuse to spend time with his first love. 30 years. 30 whole years. The cold wind blew against my face and suddenly everything clicked into place. In the winter of our 10th year of marriage, Duff had painstakingly made a handmade necklace, but it wasn't for me. I was puzzled, yet he explained it was a family heirloom for our daughter. Now I understood. Another lie. The necklace was for Alicia. And there were the Polaroid films he always stocked up on before Thanksgiving. But after the holiday there were never any photos to be found. He'd ask me to knit a scarf every year, telling me he'd embroider plum blossoms on it, but I never once saw him use it. One day while cleaning I found 2 plane tickets with the destination listed as Duff's hometown. I was ecstatic, thinking that Duff had finally decided to take me home with him. I immediately called my parents to say I wouldn't be spending Thanksgiving with them this year. But as the days passed and Thanksgiving drew near, Duff never brought it up. So I decided to take the initiative. What I didn't expect was for Duff, always so gentle, to lose his temper for the first time. He frowned, slammed down his chopsticks and snapped at me, "Can you stop thinking on a whim? We've always spent Thanksgiving apart, going back to our own families. Why is it so important for us to go back to mine this year?" I was stunned, a wave of injustice rising within me. When our children, David and Ada, found out, they all tried to convince me, though it felt less like persuasion and more like blame. David, with a stern face, spoke impatiently, "Mom, even though you and Dad are married, he's always respected you. He's never bound you to his side. Look at how many couples go to their in-laws' homes each year and end up having a miserable time because they don't get along with the relatives. Why can't you understand, Dad? And Mom, you have to keep up with the times, don't you? Do you know that young couples these days often spend Thanksgiving apart? They go to their own families with no interference. Dad's thoughts are way ahead of the curve. You don't appreciate him and now you're blaming him for it. Honestly." As David grew more heated, Ada quickly interrupted, sweetly shaking my hand. "Mom, think about it. If I get married and move to a distant city, not being able to come back for Thanksgiving, wouldn't you miss me? Wouldn't you feel sad? So Dad's suggestion is for the good of the family. Besides, when you go back you'll have to deal with a bunch of unfamiliar relatives. It's going to be stressful and you might have to cook or something. Isn't it better to just give yourself a few days off?" Hearing Ada's words, my sense of injustice eased a little, but there was still a sense of bitterness and hesitation inside. For all these years, Duff had insisted that his only responsibility was to make money, leaving everything else, big and small, for me to handle. I was constantly busy, my feet barely touching the ground, unable to even take a break to sip some water. I felt like I had done enough for the family, so why were they being so harsh on me? After all these years, when it was finally time for us to rest and enjoy a family reunion, they still didn't want to spend it with me. Instead, they'd rather lie to me. Had I not given enough for this family? I sat motionless on the bench as the sun set in the west, the world around me gradually fading into blur. Please no. No. Even in my unconscious state, I couldn't shake the heartbreaking image from my mind. The hospital contacted David and Ada. When I finally woke up and saw them, I only gave them a faint glance. David still wore that frustrated look on his face, his voice cold. Mom, why didn't you go back to San Diego? What about Bear? Who's going to take care of him? Bear, our family dog, seemed to get more care and attention than I ever did. I turned my gaze to the empty table and then to the faces of my children, both visibly irritated and dissatisfied. Thanksgiving, combined with being hospitalized, would make anyone uneasy and anxious. But for me, who had carried them for 10 months and endured excruciating labor, it felt as though my distress was just me being unreasonable. The first thing they said when they saw I was awake was to blame me. Their indifference felt like a blade cutting into me once again. I struggled to hold back my tears, bitterness flooding my heart. My throat trembled and I slowly exhaled my sadness in a sigh. Mom, please be reasonable. Your brother and I rushed over when we heard you were in the hospital, only to find out it wasn't even a big deal. I pressed my hand into the mattress beneath the blanket. Rushed over, huh? Didn't you say you were going to Jacksonville this year? It takes 5 hours by plane from there to here, and I was only unconscious for half an hour. So how did you get here so fast? They both furrowed their brows in confusion, looking at each other. What are you implying? Every year we bring back local specialties from the cities we visit on Thanksgiving. Are you accusing us of lying to you? This is ridiculous. If there's nothing else, we'll leave now. Yes, every year they would travel to different cities for Thanksgiving, always returning with local specialties. That's why I never suspected a thing. I had been completely deceived by the people closest to me for all these years. Wait. I clenched my hand, pulled out my phone and clicked on Alicia's video. I handed it to my children, speaking quietly. All these years, you've been celebrating Thanksgiving together, haven't you? David and Ada froze, their bodies stiff with fear as they stared at each other. Embarrassment, confusion, yet there was not a trace of surprise or guilt. Mom, that silhouette really looks like us, don't you think? They'd gone to such lengths to help Duff and Alicia cover up the truth, still trying to cover their tracks. And now I was the only one left in the dark. A bitter taste spread in my mouth. I closed my eyes, trying to suppress the wave of sadness and anger building within me. Just as the tears began to fall, Duff suddenly appeared in the room. You tell me, what are you doing here? Don't you know how worried everyone is at home? It's Thanksgiving and you're causing trouble. Duff's tone was full of helplessness, as though I was the one making a scene and ruining things for them. Now in my 60s, my hair had long turned white from years of worrying over the family, yet Duff still carried himself with that unyielding, upright posture. Duff, you all shall leave. There was no need to keep torturing myself over someone who wouldn't come back. I had lived most of my life never truly living for myself, and I had finally decided I would no longer be trapped in this lie. It was time to start over. What's going on? Did these kids upset you? If I didn't know better, I would have thought he actually cared. I said, get out. Just leave. In a fit of rage, I threw a pillow at Duff. His eyes widened in surprise, but he coldly responded, Esther, you're breaking the promise we made. That's disrespectful. And now you're saying these things just to make me angry? You've ruined a perfectly good Thanksgiving. We all had our own plans and you've destroyed them. Are you trying to make this our last Thanksgiving as a family? He slammed the food he had brought onto the table. Staring at the angry man in front of me, the bitterness in my heart deepened and the chill was unbearable. We had known each other for 40 years, been married for 30. He had always treated me well, never ignoring my feelings. Even our neighbors couldn't help but praise him, envying our marriage. I used to secretly take pleasure in thinking this marriage would always be happy, but I never imagined that beneath the seemingly sweet surface, it was all a lie hiding things that had already rotted away. The urge to cry was overwhelming. I took a deep breath and spoke with an icy tone. Duff, did you really think you could hide it for a lifetime after 30 years? 30 years and you're not tired? Rather than sneaking around, I'll set you free. You won't have to keep up the lie to me, your so-called wife and mother. Duff paused, turning to look at our son and daughter. Their faces were frozen in shock. Even if they were slow, it didn't take a genius to figure it out. He opened his mouth, moved his lips, but no words came out. His face betrayed his panic. The atmosphere was awkward and tense. I stood up, deciding to leave, out of sight, out of mind. David, frustrated, blocked my way. His tone was impatient. Mom, is this really necessary? Dad and Aunt Alicia are both so old. If they truly cared, would we even be here? Don't be so sensitive. Besides, you're so old now. If you get divorced, who's going to take care of you? What kind of life do you think you'll have? David's right, Mom. We're just looking out for you, Ada quickly added, trying to smooth things over. I lifted my gaze and coldly stared at them. How could they shamelessly say such things? Look, Dad brought you salad. Doesn't that show he cares about you? Ada placed the lunchbox in front of me, wishing me to pass these issues away. Duff, his hands resting on his knees, turned his gaze from the side and looked at me, his face holding a flicker of expectation. What was he expecting? That a box of salad with kale, which I hated, would somehow make me forget everything and not hold a grudge? I had only now realized just how low they thought of me. I've never liked kale. And the edge of the takeout box had lipstick marks on it. All along, Duff had probably reserved his real care and thoughtfulness for someone else, leaving me with nothing but half-hearted gestures. You really are ungrateful. David snapped, leaving me with nothing but the angry slam of the door. Ada glanced at me, then at Duff, sighed softly and left as well. After a long, heavy pause, Duff sighed and pinched his brow. Esther, I can explain, things aren't the way you think. I haven't been unfaithful. I said nothing, letting him continue on his own. Back then, Alicia's parents did so much for me and I swore I'd take care of her for them. When she grew up, I even proposed marriage so I could remain by her side as her husband. But she said she didn't want to be trapped in a marriage. So all I had to do was spend every Thanksgiving with her to keep my promise. Her parents died early and she was so alone and vulnerable. If I didn't accompany her on Thanksgiving, I feared she might do something drastic. Esther, try to understand my predicament. He added, I merely sit with her, have a meal, chat through Thanksgiving, and that's all. There's nothing more between us. I waited in silence until he finished, then with an indifferent nod said, Are you done? Then let's talk about our divorce. Esther. Duff snapped, clearly agitated as he cut me off. I fixed him with a scornful look. You don't need to explain anything. I couldn't care less. All these years you've been hiding things from me. Who can tell which of your words are truth and which are lies? Just give me a time when we can arrange the divorce and you can go back to your Alicia to spend Thanksgiving with her. And thanks for going to the trouble of packing up her leftovers for me. At that moment, a patient from the next room returned and glared at Duff with unmistakable disdain. Duff's face froze in humiliation. After a beat, in a tone laced with defiance, he said, What's that to you? Didn't you used to scarf down leftover meals when you washed dishes at the restaurant? Alicia's healthy. What's there to worry about? Some words cut deeper than any blade, inflicting invisible wounds. I recalled that first year of our marriage when Duff was fired amid a crushing economic depression. 4 months he couldn't find work, and during that gap, I held this family together by juggling 3 part-time jobs day and night. To save every penny, I even resorted to eating customers' leftover meals at the restaurant where I worked, a fact that earned me derisive looks from my co-workers. Those were the most grueling, painful days of my life, ones I'd rather forget. When Duff learned of it at that time, his eyes welled with sympathy as he held me close and cried with me through the night, vowing never again to let me suffer through eating scraps or force me into relentless labor. And now, here at 60, Duff had the audacity to use that very memory as a weapon against me. Perhaps he suddenly realized his mistake. He shifted uncomfortably, watching as I silently glared at him. Abruptly, he rose and left, murmuring, You're too worked up right now to talk calmly. I'm leaving, you take some rest first. Every street and alleyway was filled with laughter and the unmistakable spirit of the holiday, yet there I lay, alone in a hospital bed. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with several texts from an unfamiliar number. It was Alicia. Her messages insisted that I had misunderstood everything and begged to meet up. After Duff got back, his mood suddenly turned sour. I only found out what was going on after I asked. Esther, I think you've misunderstood too much. Let's meet. I'm truly sorry for causing a rift between you and Duff. I couldn't help but recall how Duff had told me to cool off, a command that now dripped with irony. Once I'd exposed the truth, he couldn't bear the loss of face and had scurried off to Alicia's place, his very own safe haven. David and Ada were also firing off texts, some trying to console me, others offering excuses for their dad, Duff, but not one message carried any genuine concern for how I felt. I didn't reply to a single one, my inner turmoil oddly muted into a disturbing calm. Before I managed to complete the checkout and leave the hospital on my own, I encountered an uninvited guest at the exit. No matter what Alicia said, she wouldn't let me go. She practically dragged me into a nearby coffee shop. You must be the Alicia Swan from online, right? Time certainly has been kind to you, the waiter remarked, approaching us with an eager smile as he asked for a photo of us together. His tone and expression were thick with admiration and envy. After all, at 60, Alicia still exudes a captivating charm, with flawless, well-maintained skin and an outfit so refined one might easily mistake her for being in her early 40s. Next to her, I looked every bit the plain, unremarkable old lady I felt. There was a time when I'd thought myself unworthy of sitting at her table, convinced her life was the perfect script for today's youth. But now that the truth had shattered every rose-colored filter I'd once placed on her, all those illusions lay in ruins. Esther, I'm truly sorry for causing a rift between you and your husband, Alicia said softly. Please allow me to cover the bill. Let's have a coffee together, I want to apologize. She shifted slightly, every movement radiating elegance. Esther, you really shouldn't let this trouble you. Duff and the kids consider me family and I do too. Of course, I hope you can come to see me as family as well. I said nothing, simply clutching the warmth of my coffee cup. Her tone was measured, her eyes gently arched. But beneath that calm, I detected a hint of provocation, the smug arrogance of someone who believes they've already won. I understand you're angry at Duff, at the kids and even at me. But don't hurt yourself over it, and you have no reason to fear that I'll steal him away. If I wanted him, do you honestly think Duff would still be married to you? Women shouldn't make things hard for one another. I'm not here to destroy your family. I set my chopsticks down. As painful as it was to admit, Alicia's words rang true. If she chose to take the initiative, Duff would undoubtedly end our marriage in a heartbeat and rush right into her arms. But why? If he truly didn't care for me, why maintain any contact at all? Was it because of familial duty? Or was it sheer loneliness? No, none of that could explain it. I didn't mince words. I demanded answers. For a moment, Alicia's flawless expression faltered. After a long, tense silence, she pulled out a photograph and handed it to me. In the picture, Alicia was enveloped in an embrace. Duff on one side and on the other Hank Goldman, Duff's older brother, whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to his. Hatred and longing intertwined in her eyes. I never imagined I'd speak of him again. I miss those early days so terribly, she confessed. I used to dream of being Hank's wife, but he betrayed me. He left me and quickly turned away to marry someone else. For the first time, I saw a flash of indignation and stubborn defiance on Alicia's otherwise unflappable face. But I refused to believe he'd forgotten his vows, so I began contacting Duff, hoping to make Hank jealous enough to come back to me. Her tone brimmed with confidence and expectation, yet as I listened, her words struck me as both laughable and immature. Tenderly, she caressed the face in the photo, and eventually tears welled up. Vows, after all, might be the least valuable promises in the world, yet those who swear by them take every word to heart. Stepping out of that reverie, Alicia's demeanor snapped back to its haughty poise. Rest assured, I'm only using Duff. There's never been, nor will there ever be, anything physical between us. So what? Should I applaud your moral high ground? Be thankful that in all these 30 years of deceiving me, no fleshly betrayal occurred. I shot back before the words could fully form, when suddenly the sound of a cup shattering on the floor reached our ears. Duff had, without any of us noticing, slipped in behind me and Alicia. Alicia stared at him, utterly bewildered, unsure if Duff had caught every word. "Duff, what are you doing here?" she asked. Quickly dabbing away the tears at the corners of her eyes, she beckoned him to sit. Duff's gaze remained fixed on her reddened eyes. Almost instinctively, he reached out to brush away a tear from her cheek. Startled at first, Alicia then, remembering that someone else was present, awkwardly withdrew his hand. It wasn't until I let out a quiet, disapproving chuckle that Duff snapped back to attention. He awkwardly glanced at me before his eyes drifted to the iced coffee in front of Alicia. "How can you drink an iced Americano?" he chided, as if forgetting her chronic stomach issues. Nervously, Duff quickly poured her a cup of hot water, testing the temperature on the back of his hand before handing it over. Alicia watched his reaction, clearly oblivious to his earlier words, and silently exhaled in relief. As for me, after 30 years living under the same roof with Duff, when he wouldn't even operate the water dispenser without my help, I was struck by the realization that he could, after all, take care of someone. "I know that deep inside your anger has no outlet," he went on. "If you want to hit or shout at me, I won't complain. I admit I've deceived you for all these years. But why must you force this on Alicia? You're no longer the Esther I once knew," he added bitterly. "I'm deeply disappointed in you." I stared into his eyes, which were filled with overwhelming disappointment. In that moment, I could no longer empathize with the first half of my life. How could a man so selfish and blinded by his own desires possess any qualities worthy of my love? I clenched my fists, terrified that I might lose control and erupt in public. "Duff, in our home, am I supposed to be a mother or a maid? Or do you simply believe that a mother is nothing more than a housekeeper?" I demanded. "You have no right to express disappointment in me," he shot back. "I'm the one who should be disappointed. 30 years wasted, kept in the dark by our entire family." Duff looked at me with a pained expression. "Must you say it so harshly?" he pleaded. "Duff, shut up," I snapped. "This all started because of me. I should be the one apologizing to you both." At that moment, Alicia, who had been standing quietly at my side, interjected. Without warning, Duff stood and swept Alicia into his arms, shielding her as though she were his most precious treasure. I watched in silence as the bitter truth, once familiar, turned repulsive, leaving behind a dull, aching pain. There was a time when I, too, had defended Duff. In the early days of his career, when friends and neighbors doubted him, I, with a heavy belly, stood up for him, reprimanding anyone who dared throw cold water on his dreams. I believed in him so fiercely that I fought off every sneer and insult, determined to preserve his dignity. And what did I receive in return? My own husband's resentment and misunderstanding, while he shielded another woman as if I were the villain. I felt like a clown, and indeed I was one. I couldn't hold it in any longer. In a fit of rage, I flung the coffee all over Duff's face and then hurled the cup at him with all the force I had left. Alicia shrieked, "Esther, you're crazy." I glared at Duff, teeth gritted with fury. "You have no right to apologize on her behalf, Duff," I spat. "If you really need it, I can arrange for you to spend every Thanksgiving with her, forever, if you agree to a divorce. And we won't have to see each other again," I continued, my voice ice cold. "Except perhaps on the day of the divorce. Until then, my lawyer will be in touch." Duff's face remained impassive, yet an icy aura radiated from him. I ignored him and, without a backward glance, strode out the door. Back in San Diego, I began packing my belongings, preparing to leave for good. As I sorted through my things, a crushing thought struck me again. 30 years of my life had been an utter failure. I gathered up all my seasonal clothes, yet they wouldn't even fill a single suitcase. Some of these garments had been my constant companions for years. What was I thinking back then? How could I have ever been willing to let myself suffer so much? The only new clothes I'd received in recent years were the ones Ada bought for me when she got her first paycheck, and I'd been too reluctant to wear them. I remembered how Ada had once worn her pride on her sleeve, declaring that from then on, she and David would take care of buying my clothes. But now it seemed they'd long forgotten that promise. They had grown so used to my sacrifices, to the sight of me in my daily apron as I kept the house running for them. I stared at the coat Ada had given me for what felt like an eternity before finally returning it to the closet. I no longer needed it, and I didn't want to take it with me. After years away, I stepped back into a bustling mall. I wandered into the women's section and picked up a bright red dress, holding it up in front of the mirror. A friendly sales associate complimented me and even selected a matching pair of shoes. In that moment, I caught my reflection and offered a soft, liberated smile. Not the weary smile I'd worn after a day of endless housework, but one that spoke of being alive again, of finally living for myself. Before embarking on my journey, I met with a divorce lawyer and carefully reviewed the separation papers. When she handed the documents to me, she smiled warmly and said, "Ma'am, congratulations on beginning your next adventure." That young smile eased something deep inside me. You see, ending a marriage isn't about having your future happiness snatched away. It's about opening the door to a brand new chapter. I suddenly found myself with vast stretches of free time I'd never known before. In just a few days of rest, I discovered the true meaning of freedom and ease. I thought, while I still have the energy to explore, why not travel across the country, even around the world, and immerse myself in new cultures and experiences? So I set off without hesitation. On the day of my departure, when David and the others came home, they found the divorce papers neatly laid out on the table. They bombarded me with over a dozen voice messages, each blaming my supposed stubbornness and mocking the idea that our family could possibly function without me. Duff even called, questioning if I really had to go this far. They assumed their harsh words would break me, that I'd crumble under the weight of their disapproval. But they were mistaken. Once you accept reality and let go of past attachments, your mind clears and the truth becomes undeniable. After decades spent tangled in lies and obligations, I realized that my remaining days to truly live were far too few to waste on endless arguments. I was ready to chase sunlight, freedom, and the things that set my soul on fire. As for those who might soon be forming a new family with Alicia, I will wish them well, provided they can let go of their old habits of entitlement and learn to embrace her. And above all, Duff must never know that he was merely a pawn in their plans. With my phone switched to airplane mode, I left all the past behind and headed toward the boarding gate, ready to step into my new life. On my travels, I encountered countless young people, vibrant, enthusiastic souls who patiently taught me how to take pictures, compose shots, and even encouraged me to start vlogging. They said my videos could inspire other seniors like me. I found their energy both amusing and deeply meaningful. At first, the comments were laced with mockery, accusing me of just chasing attention. I brushed it off. Even if just one person felt encouraged, it was enough. Gradually, my videos began to garner a flood of likes and genuine admiration. Many left comments of envy and even hailed me as a role model. During my journey, Duff would call me at all hours. I ignored his first call, then the second, then the third, until one time by accident I answered. I heard Duff standing by the washing machine, his face a picture of confusion as he fiddled with the buttons. In a tone thick with self-pity, he asked, "Esther, when are you coming back? My clothes are dirty and I can't figure out how to work the washer." Without waiting for my reply, he wandered into the kitchen and asked how to tell sugar from salt. I sighed in exasperation. The ever-resourceful Duff. Could he really not know these basic things? It was clear he was trying in his own clumsy way to give me an out. But I wasn't going to give him that comfort. I replied coolly, "Call me again when you're ready to sign the divorce papers." "Esther, must it really come to this? You know I've never wanted to break our family apart," he pleaded. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Duff, you already failed me when you were 30. You married me only because you'd given up on Alicia. And for 30 years you clung to her. Your cowardice is what brought us here." He stuttered, "Now you're 60. You have me at home and Alicia out there. You can't have it both ways. There's no such thing in the world." "Just let me go," I said sharply. "It's the only way you can truly be free." Duff was at a loss, muttering that he knew he'd done wrong. Just as I was about to hang up, my phone slipped into David's hand. He asked if I could come back. He and his girlfriend wanted to see me. "Maybe later, David. You've been an adult for years now. Perhaps once I've savored my own vacation, I'll have time to resume my role as your always caring mother." With that, I ended the call, leaving the past behind as I continued on my journey. Duff finally signed the divorce papers. I returned to San Diego to collect my divorce certificate, and soon David and Ada were bombarding me with calls. On the other end, David erupted, "Mom, have you thought about my reputation at all? What will people say about me? At your age, causing a divorce fuss. Can't you just pretend nothing's wrong? It's only a meeting. Why must you make a mountain out of a molehill? Aren't you ashamed?" He continued, "And what about the asset division? Are you forcing Dad to give you his money? Is that even fair? How dare you take so much of what Dad earned? Even if you ignore Dad, you should think of me. I'm about to start my own family. Dad's support used to help me out, but now you've taken most of his money. Are you trying to ruin me? He shouted. I had already let everything go. Calmly I replied, I supported you nearly 30 years. You know I fulfilled every duty. And yet, what do you know about gratitude? Do you even understand what it means to be dutiful? I will not allow you to be that spoiled boy who would always break my heart again. He didn't fire back and I continued, and when you start your own family, if you have a daughter, a little girl, can you bear watching her go through what I did? Can you stand by and see a spoiled little princess after she gets married, forced to shoulder endless housework? Not to mention, I added in the last, would you want your little sister to live the life I had lived? After a long, tense pause, his voice rose again in self-justification. You talk about grand ideals. Everyone has their own dreams. Life is just fate's design. Just give me back the money, he demanded. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I had never even mentioned a specific amount, and strictly speaking, it was Duff who was entirely in the wrong. I said nothing more and hung up the phone. Over a month later I met Duff again. He had aged considerably. When he saw me he hesitated, then murmured, You've changed so much. And indeed I had. I now fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow, woke naturally the next day free from endless chores and the need to pander to others, and I looked better for it. After I signed the documents I passed the pen to Duff. He lowered his eyes, hesitating as if burdened by the past. Finally he asked in a tentative voice, if I promise that from now on I'll spend every holiday with you and sever ties with Alicia, would you give me another chance? I was taken aback, but my answer was firm. No. It's like a graded exam. No matter how much you change your answers, it doesn't matter. I replied coldly, just sign the papers. You've already wasted the first half of my life, don't waste the rest. Without further protest, Duff signed. 1 month later Alicia became the talk of the town, her name trending online again. She reshared a family photo that David had posted. In the picture Alicia was linked arm in arm with Duff. Their son was cozily embracing a young woman, presumably his wife, and at the center their daughter beamed with joy. The 5 of them looked every bit the picture of familial bliss. Caption read, True destiny endures the test of time, mine and my father's as well. The post sparked a frenzy of attention, discussion and likes. The comments section overflowed with well wishes, though a few doubters speculated that her previously curated single image had merely been a ploy for clicks, an assertion quickly drowned out by a torrent of blessings. One comment even mused, could this be the same person who spent 30 Thanksgivings with Alicia before? Alicia didn't reply, though she did leave a like. More and more users chimed in, insisting that true love always finds its way. Meanwhile, David, desperate to showing off the so-called new family of theirs, sent me screenshots of the glowing comments along with a note. See? We're one happy family. I chose not to engage. Instead I set off on a new tour once again. Little did they expect that the house of cards would come crashing down so swiftly. After I left, Alicia moved in with Duff. At first everything looked perfect. A picture of family bliss. David and Ada, who had always complained about my constant nagging, now relished Alicia's gentle, soothing manner. They even began calling her Mom without hesitation. Later, when Alicia started spending her own money to hire a nanny, the family's affection for her soared even higher. One day the nanny was so overwhelmed with work that she couldn't find time to walk Bear. Sensing an opportunity, Alicia volunteered to take him out. Instead of heading to a quiet park, she opted for a stroll around a shopping mall. However, the mall enforced a strict no pets policy. Unable to resist, Alicia slipped into a clothing store with Bear waiting outside. By the time she emerged, Bear had vanished without a trace. Panic set in. After hours of frantic searching and a desperate call to the police, Bear was still nowhere to be found. When she returned home, the nanny had already clocked out. Without missing a beat, Alicia shifted all the blame onto her and promptly fired her. One would have thought that would be the end of it, but Alicia had underestimated how much Bear meant to Ada. Bear had been Ada's loyal playmate for years, more treasured than even her best friend. Incensed, Ada, along with David, stormed over to the fired nanny's place, unleashing a tirade that left her reeling and embarrassed in front of their neighbors. The poor nanny, having lost not only her job but also her dignity, only learned the whole truth from Ada's bitter accusations. Feeling wronged, the nanny took to the internet to expose Alicia. She condemned Alicia for her air of superiority, her constant disdain for her peers and hardworking staff, and for her habit of lying and shirking responsibility. Her post quickly caught fire and animal lovers flooded Alicia's comment section, demanding that she apologize. When Ada and David learned of the full story, they could hardly believe the woman they once welcomed into the family was capable of such behavior. In an abrupt reversal, they forced Alicia to apologize and demanded that she find Bear. But Alicia refused. She claimed it was merely an innocent oversight, and shamelessly argued that Bear had only himself to blame. "He's old enough to know better," she sneered. "If he wanders off, then so be it. I can always get another." Out of sheer exasperation, Ada called me. "After all these years, I was the one who'd always taken care of Bear. Mom, we said some awful things when we were angry. Can't we just let it go?" Ada pleaded. "And don't be so stubborn," they added. "You always treated Bear so well. We know you must be worried about him." They weren't entirely wrong. Bear had always been the best part of our little family. He would eagerly pick up the grocery bag when I went shopping, and whenever I tied a knot on the garbage bag at the door, he'd faithfully carry it to the dumpster. At home, he was my constant companion. When Bear went missing, I was just as distraught as they were, even though I felt helpless to do anything. After their call, I scrambled to recall every park and corner Bear loved to frequent and relayed every address I could think of. Thankfully, after a nerve-wracking few days, Bear was found safe and sound. He'd been hanging out in the park I frequented with him. Yet the drama didn't end there. The incident sparked a massive uproar online. The moment Bear was recovered, the internet lit up with controversy. Netizens combed through Alicia's social media questioning, why would a 60-year-old marry someone who already has children, and even an ex-wife? That one question stirred 1,000 more. Soon similar queries flooded in. Insiders began spilling details about Duff's divorce and even recalled the commotion in that fateful coffee shop. As questions and answers flew back and forth, more and more details emerged. Some fans defended Alicia, tweeting, "Stop being so idle. True love always finds its way, understand?" Others countered, "Where did the original wife go? How can a couple who spent most of their lives together suddenly decide to divorce? Something isn't adding up. Remember when she posted that video about spending the 30th Thanksgiving together, claiming that the man was only a confidant? So where is his wife now? And wasn't his divorce finalized just months ago? Could it be that the original wife caught him cheating? Poor original wife." Those who had once accused Alicia of merely chasing clicks even began posting screenshots with comments like, "Why delete my comment? Did I really hit a nerve?" Before long, both Alicia and Duff were trending nationwide. Local neighbors even compiled timelines that pieced together the true sequence of events. From being the object of envy to becoming the subject of widespread scorn, Alicia offered no response. She simply deactivated her account. With her silence, the online community turned its attention to David. Swarms of commenters bombarded his posts, calling him shameless and ungrateful, labeling him a heartless ingrate. The controversy raged on. Even the old neighbors, upon hearing the news, rallied to my defense. They pointed accusing fingers at Duff and calling David them as spoiled brats who'd never learned gratitude. My travel account, my little corner of the internet where I shared my journey, was eventually unearthed by curious netizens. One comment asked how I felt about everything. I didn't scold or complain, I simply replied, "May everyone have the courage to start over, and may everyone soon realize that life is meant to be lived for oneself." That one remark garnered countless likes and praise for its wisdom. In just a few days, my followers exploded and I kept hitting the platform's recommendation lists. I'd become an influential figure, so much so that a local senior college invited me to visit and even speak. Who would have thought that after leaving that unloving home behind, I would find success? No longer was I the invisible old lady I once was. I now radiated confidence and vitality, as if my long-awaited spring had finally arrived, undimmed by lost years and advancing age. Since the college was right here in San Diego, it wasn't entirely unexpected when I ran into Duff and Alicia again. After finishing my speech and heading out of the building, I saw Duff standing under a tree's shade, his gaze fixed on me. "Esther, how have you been?" he asked hesitantly. He looked like a shriveled eggplant left out in the sun, his face creased with fine lines and exhaustion. After decades of knowing each other, I greeted him like an old friend. I'm doing well. How's the family? I replied. That's good, I'm glad you still talk to me, he murmured, offering a small tentative smile. Yet something in his familiar eyes stirred an unexpected sense of estrangement in me. Before I could process it further, Alicia appeared around the corner, her voice shrill and hysterical. Duff, I can't believe you suddenly agreed to come pick me up yesterday. It turns out you knew Esther was coming here. In that moment I realized everyone had changed. Alicia's eyes, once bright and full of life, now seemed dimmed. And as always, human nature craves gossip. Her loud outburst even made passers-by pause to listen. You just can't let her go, can you? Because you never forget her. You've grown colder to me ever since you got me. When your kids went crazy over that dog and scolded me, you just sat there in silence, she screamed. I must have been blind, cursed for 8 lifetimes, to have chosen you. With a sudden motion, Alicia scooped up a stick and took off chasing Duff. Along the roadside, onlookers whispered and watched the unfolding drama. She used to be my role model, someone murmured. Now she has changed so much, completely lost that old graceful aura as another woman. Another bystander added, have you heard? Ever since all that family scandal, they haven't been able to hire a decent nanny. They even delayed paying their housekeeper and it all got exposed. Now every local agency has blacklisted them. Everything is outsourced to Alicia so she never has to endure those grueling days again. Really? How could they possibly delay wages? Someone else scoffed. She used to earn a lot, and with Duff's pension that doesn't even add up. Then another voice chimed in. Not at all. Alicia's money was swindled away ages ago by that smooth-talking David to cover his house down payment. Who knows when he'll ever pay it back? And just like that, the gossip and speculation swirled, each comment adding fuel to a fire that showed no signs of dying down. It wasn't until the college administrators stepped in that the whole farce was finally halted. Later, I learned the real reason behind the fierce arguments between Duff and Alicia. On my rare return home, I had planned to reconnect with some old friends who lived in the same neighborhood as Duff. As I happened to pass by my former home, I caught snippets of Duff and Alicia's shouting. You see, Esther's back, so her old flame must be rekindling, huh? Of course, or else why else would you be snooping for her news? Don't think I don't know. You were secretly checking her photos in the dead of night. You're so rotten, you really are. Then out of nowhere a sharp slap rang out, startling even the birds perched on a nearby branch. Shut up, and how dare you accuse me? Don't think I haven't noticed. You've been using me all along. Ever since the beginning you've loved Hank. Why keep stringing me along and ruining my life? I was taken aback by these words, though in a way, it wasn't entirely unexpected. After all, the truth always finds a way to surface. How dare you hit me? Duff, how dare you lay a hand on me? If he were here, he'd never let me be so wronged. I'm ready to fight you. Esther, what are you standing there for? Come on. The sudden appearance of a friend spurred me on, and we hurried to catch up. During our conversation, when the topic of Duff and Alicia came up, my friend's eyes turned icy as she muttered a dismal remark. Through her bitter complaints, I soon pieced together the full story. Essentially, Alicia cared only about having everything handed to her. If anyone refused to cater to her whims, they'd be met with caustic sarcasm. There was even an incident when David brought his girlfriend over for dinner. She ran a pet store and had long harbored resentment toward Alicia over the bear debacle. That night, unable to tolerate Alicia's presence any longer, she barely acknowledged her. But then, as if things couldn't get any worse, Alicia lost it on the spot. She hurled bowls and utensils at the young woman, nearly tearing the house apart. To make matters worse, that young woman was Ada's best friend, and with that act, Alicia managed to offend 3 people at once. From that day on, it was impossible for the household to go even a day without a commotion. Soon it wasn't just the family who grew fed up. The neighbors began lodging complaints too. On several occasions the police were even called to break up the turmoil. Duff and Alicia became increasingly unwelcome in the community, almost always hiding behind closed doors. I listened to all this with a wry, detached smile, without a hint of sorrow or delight. Deep down I felt nothing at all. As our conversation wound down, my friend asked where I was headed next. Just then my phone rang with a message. Your ticket has been successfully issued. You may check in online in advance. I held up my phone so my friend could see and said, "I'll bring you a gift when I get back." On the day of my departure, the weather was splendid. A fellow traveler asked me where I was off to next. I wasn't entirely sure. But one thing was clear: I wasn't going to stand still at the same place ever again.